You've got one leader who persuades and another who just imposes. One who carefully builds consensus and another who seems to love breaking it. We're talking about two totally different ways of using political power. But what if I told you that even though they look like complete opposites, they might just be two sides of the very same coin? And that right there, that's the big question we're diving into today. You see these two distinct paths, one that's all about persuasion and one that's all about force. But is it possible they're both heading to the exact same place? Well, let's dig in and find out. Okay, first up, let's define our terms. We've got what this analysis calls smart power. Now, the best way to think about this is like a political velvet glove hiding an iron fist. It's this really strategic mix of persuasion and force, and it's all designed to get things done in a way that feels totally legitimate, to win your support, not just demand it. And on the complete other side of that, you have blunt power. This is the iron fist, but with no velvet glove. It's direct, it's forceful, and honestly, it prioritizes getting immediate results, way over winning any hearts and minds. The goal here isn't to build consensus, it's all about making a splash, right now. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this smart power actually look like in practice, out in the real world? Let's open up the playbook, and we'll use the political approach of Kamala Harris as a case study. All right, let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about: police body cameras. Now, on the surface, this is framed as a totally straightforward progressive reform, right? It's all about transparency, all about accountability. Simple. But as we're about to see, the strategy behind it can be a whole lot more complex. This whole process has a name. It's called co-optation, and it kind of unfolds in three key steps. First, you frame the policy with really appealing words like transparency to get everybody on board. Second, you use that appeal to build this big consensus and basically disarm anyone who might oppose it. But here's the kicker. Step 3, you expand power. That very same tool that was sold as a reform, the body cam, actually ends up increasing the state's hard power through surveillance. And this leads us to this really powerful, kind of weird paradox. By creating just the appearance of accountability, the institution itself can actually end up getting stronger, more powerful, and even more resistant to any real fundamental change. I mean, think about it. The same institution that controls the footage is the one it's supposed to be keeping in check. And this whole playbook, using progressive-sounding language, it doesn't just stop with policing. The analysis points to a very similar dynamic when it comes to the strategic use of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI language. It's presented as another key tool in that smart power toolkit. So here's the breakdown of how this strategy plays out. The inclusive language is great for building these huge coalitions. It can take really radical ideas for change and sort of absorb them, watering them down and neutralizing their power. And maybe most critically, it can shift the entire conversation to cultural issues, which can be a huge distraction from deeper fundamental economic problems, all while making the institution look super progressive. All right, so we've seen the velvet glove. Now let's switch gears and talk about the iron fist. We're going to explore the blunt power approach, and this time we'll use Donald Trump's political style as our case study. You can't get a much clearer example of blunt power than the zero-tolerance immigration policy. Now, look, all administrations use hard power for enforcement, but this policy, this was a direct and a very deliberate escalation. It was a clear choice to use maximum force. And this wasn't just a small tweak. It was a complete shift in philosophy. What had mainly been a civil process suddenly became a criminal one for every single adult who crossed the border. And that directly led to the systematic separation of families, a forceful, blunt change where the impact was prioritized over everything else, including public perception or humanitarian costs. But here's where things get a little more complicated. A blunt power approach doesn't automatically mean being rigid or one note. Sometimes it can actually lead to some pretty surprising results. I mean, seriously, who saw the First Step Act coming? This was a major bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that led to the release of over 3,000 inmates. It completely flew in the face of the usual tough-on-crime rhetoric and showed that even a blunt power approach can be really pragmatic and lead to some pretty unexpected alliances. Okay, so we've looked at both sides of the coin. We've seen both playbooks in action. Now let's put them right next to each other, head to head, and really break down the differences. And, maybe more importantly, the long-term risks that come with each one. This chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? You can see the contrast so clearly.
Smart power is all about institutional stability, and it gets there through careful, consensus-building talk. But the big risk? Public disillusionment, when people realize those carefully worded reforms don't really change much. Meanwhile, blunt power is all about immediate impact, driven by provocative and ambiguous communication. The risk there? It can actually erode public trust in our institutions altogether.
So yeah, two totally different paths. One is smooth and calculated. The other is, well, chaotic and forceful. Which brings us all the way back to that big question we started with, the real core of this whole analysis. What if they both lead to the exact same place? And here's the big reveal from this analysis. The core argument is that despite looking and feeling so different, both of these styles can end up doing the same thing, protecting the status quo. Smart power does it by absorbing and redirecting calls for change from inside the system. And blunt power does it by creating so much noise and chaos and polarization that it distracts everybody from ever challenging the system itself. So just to recap how they pull this off, smart power uses the language of progress to slowly co-opt movements for change. Blunt power uses conflict and distraction to polarize everybody, which makes any kind of unified challenge to the system way, way harder. The methods are polar opposites, but the destination, well, it could be exactly the same. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Why should you care? It really comes down to this. We have to learn to look past the political style. It doesn't matter if it's friendly and consensus building or loud and confrontational. We have to train ourselves to ask one simple question. What is the actual concrete effect of this policy on real people's lives? And that leaves us with one last, really tough question to chew on. If the smooth talk of smart power and the disruptive force of blunt power can both end up just preserving the system exactly as it is, then what does it actually take? What kind of action, what kind of movement can create genuine, lasting, systemic change?